Welcome. Thank you so very much for tuning in today and closing out the NSE week with us. Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1034th New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, Programs Associate here at the Rail, and today I have the huge pleasure and privilege of being your MC for a conversation with Jia Yi Gu, Chloë Flores, and Alissa Walker. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's guests and host. Jia Yi Gu is a curator, researcher, and designer working at the intersections of art and architecture. She's the director and curator at the MAK Center for Art and Architecture. In 2016, she founded the architecture design studio Spinagu, based in Los Angeles, and her scholarly work focuses on histories of knowledge production and display practices in art and architecture. Chloë Flores is a Latinx Yaqui Native curator and arts writer, editor and advisor, and producer whose work centers body-based, performative, and site-specific practices and the production of culture in public space. She is the executive and artistic director of Home LA, an LA-based performance organization and platform for experimental and site-specific dance, performance, and art. And our host today, Alissa Walker, is a writer based in Los Angeles covering transportation, housing, urban design, public space, and environmental policy. She is the 2021 recipient of the Stephen Heller Prize for Cultural Commentary for her writing on design and urbanism, and played herself on the traffic safety episode of Adam Conover's show, Adam Ruins Everything. The episode was called Adam Ruins a Murder. Thank you all so much for being here on the NSE, and it is with extreme joy that I pass it over to you, Alissa, to get us started.
Thank you. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you so much for having us in this Friday space and 1,000 programs. That's really impressive. Just over 1,000 programs. That's really something to accomplish. So thank you for allowing us to join your roster. I think we're going to get started by having Jia and Chloë each give short presentations with these beautiful images and videos and performances that we've kind of been we're going to be talking about. So I'm going to first pass it over to Jia to kind of introduce the MAK Center and the MAK Center's bringing this amazing exhibition to the United States, and talking more expansively about the artist and her legacy. So I'll pass it to Jia to begin.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So yes, great. My name is Jia. I'm going to share a little bit about the exhibition, a little bit about VALIE Export's work, and sort of the institutional context in which the show is situated, because it's quite unusual in the ways in which the MAK Center works. So the MAK Center is a Los Angeles-based nonprofit organization. We steward 3 significant architectural landmarks by the Austrian-American architect Rudolf Schindler. And we activate them with contemporary art and architecture programming. The Schindler House, in which this exhibition is cited, is our headquarters. It's our office, but also the central space of our major exhibitions. And then we operate another site, which is the Mackey Apartments, which is a residency that we run for international artists and architects, and a study center in the Fitzpatrick Leland House. So the work we do is often highly responsive to the sites of the architecture in which we care for, and we are often working within a very close relationship to, let's say, buildings that were once houses. And in the case of VALIE Export, it was also really important for us to think about not only her body of work, which is so significant, but the ways in which it can be housed in a building like the Schindler House, which is a highly textured, dense, spatial, monumental, and domestic building. VALIE Export came to us because we are a satellite space of the Museum of Applied Arts in Vienna. And we're often thinking about opportunities for a transatlantic dialogue between Vienna and Los Angeles. While we work with all forms of all artists of all nationalities, in the case of VALIE Export, it was really important for us to think about the work of a feminist artist in this moment and the opportunity to bring her work to Los Angeles in its material form. I think as somebody who's studied art and art history, I've seen VALIE Export's work. I've known it through screens. I've known it through images, but I've never myself seen the works in person in Los Angeles. The last time she exhibited in LA was 2001 with a solo exhibition. And it became almost immediately clear the minute we unpacked the artworks in the show that there's an intense materiality to her works, which I'll sort of share a bit as well. So when we decided on the exhibition with Lily Hollein in the Museum of Applied Arts in Vienna, one of the kind of key works we were interested in were a body of the series of body configurations, which had previously also been exhibited in the Venice Biennale, curated by Lily Hollein's father, Hans Hollein. And we selected 7 works from the series and paired it with 2 films which bookmark the exhibition. It's a little complicated for me to talk about the show when we're not in the house, because so much of the ways we curate these exhibitions are in relationship to the organizational space of the house, but also the experience of being in the house. So if I struggle a little bit to articulate the kind of narrative logic of the exhibition, it's because so much of it becomes informed by being in the space and looking at the work in the space. But one thing I'll say is we were thinking carefully about the ways in which she works back and forth between photography, media, and performance. And it was really clear to us that some of her earliest works were really interested in resisting a gallerification of art, which I think parallels some of the ways we think about our institutional proposition as a presenting institution of contemporary art and architecture, but within a historic house. So we're often thinking about how to resist a mausoleum effect that takes hold of historic houses or significant homes. And most of our work is very much in relationship to the history of this house, which is to activate the house with artists and creative thinkers. Schindler himself, his wife, were often envisioning this home as both a space for experimental living, but also a space for deep conviviality, deep sociability. They often staged themselves performances, exhibitions, political rallies in the house, and invited a public into the home. And it was important that this home was not precious. And so in introducing exhibitions of radical feminist artists, and we'll talk about this a bit later, but inviting performance organizations like Home LA and curator Chloë Flores to activate the house. These are all, let's say, strategies to really resist an idea of a historic monument as a place of stasis. VALIE Export, personally has been an incredible icon of feminist art. And I think her work is often spoken of in a feminist context, but I think she was equally sophisticated in the ways she was thinking about media and mediality between photography, film, and performance, and all the ways in which these techniques of documentation and cinema kind of overlap with one another. She also, of course, often worked in a way where the female body was the primary protagonist, and the female body was itself the art construction. And I think we'll talk about this again through some of the conversation, but a lot of these works in the 60s were emerging in a moment when there was a deep liberation for women and kind of like sexual liberation. At the same time, the opposite of that spectrum is the emergence of a kind of era that gives us Playboy, So it's interesting to think about these, as we see today, these forms of extremism that start to emerge when we're pushing boundaries. And then I mean, I'll just stop here because I feel like there's going to be a lot more to say. And one thing I will say is part of the intention we had with the exhibition, bringing VALIE Export's work to Los Angeles, she was unfortunately unable to travel herself to LA, given some of the challenges of travel these days. But we thought it was really important to bring Los Angeles into conversation with her work and to not only present works to be viewed, but also to invite artists to respond to her incredible, incredible history. And we thought, what better partner than Chloë Flores, who I've worked with previously, and Home LA, and potentially to think about what a performance program could be with Los Angeles-based artists working through an expansive definition of femme identity. I might pass it to Chloe at this point if, yeah.
Thanks, Jia. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. I wonder if I should start talking about the curatorial premise a little bit. For me, so curatorially, I started thinking about body configurations and public space. Thinking about how public space is a space where social and political relations get played out, but also a space that regulates our body and how we move through space, much like how architecture does. So citing it in the Schindler House really had those aspects for me. In body configurations, VALIE Export is inserting her body into these spaces, subverting the public space and bringing visibility to femme subjectivity, but not just a femme subjectivity, but a spatialized femme subjectivity. And that led me to consider VALIE Export in this trajectory of minds who were really making sense of social spaces and spatialized subjectivities prior to postmodernity, like Baudelaire's construct of the flaneur as a way of experiencing the city, and the situationist internationalist theories on dérivé as a method of experiencing the built environment. So the common thing here being ways in which individuals formulate a public identity in relation to their environs. So within this context, we can see body configurations as a continued exploration on this theme, with Export's examination of public spaces being as critical gendered spaces where the spatialized female subjectivity is played out. And then going back to the Schindler House, here we have this body of work being exhibited in this structure created for private life that now functions as a pseudo-public space that's tasked as an art organization and historical site. So with its public functionality, we can see the Schindler House as this public space, and as such, it can act as a site of reflexivity for these, for contemporary femme subjectivities, which was the invitation to the artist. We can talk about the process of bringing them in. Jia, do you want to do that before I go into their work, or?
The site visits?
Yeah.
Yeah, so some of the work that we do institutionally is often really focused on a process of engaging artists with the house. And when we say engaging with the artists with the house, we don't mean that we need artists to work immediately and didactically, constantly representing the house back to audiences. Instead, we like to work with artists in ways where we are inviting them into the space and both experiencing the space, but also dialoguing about the house and history and design and the qualities with myself, Chloe, and our team. And through dialogue, beginning to probe at these openings for more interpretation and more interventions that we may not know or have seen before. So in this case, we brought together all of the artists in a day, and you know, almost in a workshop manner, kind of sat and situate ourselves in the house to think through opportunities in conversation with one another, often in a kind of supportive feedback. I think being in the house is also really helpful, which has been a distinct way of working. Often site visits are not a typical, well, I think a performance is a little different, but and that has been, I think that's been really fruitful. But Chloe, you should share a bit. You should share a bit of yours. Yeah.
So similarly, home LA and my curatorial practice and site specificity, it requires a lot of time in the space. We find that that's very generative. So bringing folks in, allowing them, Jia offered a tour where she talked about not only the Schindler House, but the institutional structures at play. And then we took a moment for the artists to go around the space, and then we met back up to talk about the connections with VALIE Export, their initial responses, and to get in a conversation about those topics and things that came up from them. This methodology is, I believe, is very helpful for the institution, the curator, and the artist. Not only is it bringing everybody together through food and drink and in a domestic space, but it creates a very nice dialogue for everyone to be in conversation, because oftentimes you will have artists doing their own work separately, and there isn't a combined conversation, which I find is really helpful. So in response to the invitation of making work in response to body configurations, which is on view at the Schindler House, and within that being within the context of the Schindler House itself, the artists created 7 performance works, actually 6 artists created 6 performance works. The first one you saw, if we can go back to that one is Zachary Drucker. The work is called Door Girl. And Zachary is playing homage to these very informative years where VALIE exports on the syllabus. I mean, we joked about like bringing VALIE off the syllabus and into the world again. That she studied with Michael Asher, is really interested in these subtle interventions. And by placing her body in the front, inviting people in, she was bringing not only visibility to a trans body, but also creating a welcoming space for all bodies and genders across the spectrums and beyond. So that it was really nice to bring Zachary into this place. It was an interesting moment because there was rain during the performance. And so we usually have the check-in center right on this DG dirt path. So it's the first thing you see, but that was covered with mud. And we were going to put her at the front door, but it was like there was a drain dripping down and a trash can. It was really small and congested. And then we just decided, Jia had suggested to move her into the kitchen, which created this even better sense of welcoming, you know, how the kitchen functions in domestic spaces or at house parties. And then she spent moments with everybody that came in, asking them what color bracelet they wanted, engaging them in their day. In the meantime, creating this really long line, which was also part of the intervention of, you know, being like a club, hunkering back to her days as a door girl at the queer club Shits and Giggles in the aughts. So that's Zachary Drucker's work there. We see her signing someone in. I'm not sure what the next slide is. Okay, so this is Sierra Fujita. This work is called Hana. Sierra is very interested in subverting representation. This work is deeply rooted in her intersectional identity as a queer mixed race dance artist of Japanese and Austrian roots. She pulled from, the Schindler House design, as well as the exports impulse to break from society's binary code. So she's destabilizing a lot of like movement-based and material signifiers of Japanese culture. The way that she was moving throughout the performance, her dress, she wore a kimono made by her mother, some shibari rope binding over it, and then started with a hana mask. So layering them on top of one another to challenge our perceptions of gender and identity, and questioning where one's selfhood is located, while also celebrating her own cultural heritage. So she performed this in the nursery and then moved out into the garden. Laura Salmon Surge. Laura is an artist who lives in chronic pain, and she had created a work where she invites participants. This is a participatory event program where she invited audiences to come in and change the dials on a TENS unit. So the TENS unit is often used within the community who experiences chronic pain as a way of resetting your neurological sensors so that you come out of pain. Your body is no longer recognizing the pain and is focusing on the muscle contractions. So here she's laying, she was prominently laying with her legs up on the wall, like kind of like in a VALIE exportee pose. But she thinks about this as, a lot of VALIE's work is bringing visibility to the body, the female body. And Laura felt like this work couldn't actually have ever taken place without the groundwork laid by these early feminists, where she can actually talk about in her artwork the nuances of living with pain. And this reminds me a little bit of Touch Tap Cinema too, where there's that participatory event. And a lot of times audience members, we previewed this work at the opening, and audience members were really hesitant to engage because there's a jolt of electricity that's going into her body that's causing her muscles to contract. And even though the didactics were explaining that this was helpful for her to ease her out of her pain, but folks couldn't get past the action of putting electricity into somebody's body as a violent act. So we retranslated that information, that didactic information, so it was very instructional, and that was very helpful to have that moment in the preview to restructure it so that we can get the engagement that she needed so she can be out of pain, but also so the work felt more successful in that translation. This is Andrea Soto, dance artist. She was doing more of a corporeal exploration of destabilizing her own identity through inscriptions in the landscape. So in this one, in Multitude 1, she does it in public space with like more of a mechanical landscape. And then in Multiple 2, which is the next slide, she worked a little bit more with the house and this unearthed trench that was cut up into the ground for the Schindler House water, like remediation, flood remediation. So she was following those lines through the house and through the landscape to examine her assumed identity. So there was a lot of like trying to emasculate her movements and then moving past them to get to a more neutral place, but then struggling with performing in a very feminine way. So that it was a very internal corporeal dialogue that the audience got to witness. Emily Lucid performed with Kyle Patrick Roberts, a piece called Minotaur. This piece was an allegorical love story where Emily's trans body is interpreting the character of Hercules. And instead of killing the Minotaur, they fall unconditionally in love and endure this labyrinth together in this long-term healthy relationship that was played out in 4 parts across an hour and then repeated. So the 4 parts were broken into 15-minute sessions, like seasons of love, because there were each season. And then the whole thing allegorically coming together as an affirmation that to be trans or trans attracted is an inherent and human right. The last image is Dorian Wood. The piece is called Carry Us and Nourish Them, Prayer. Dorian was one of the artists who immediately responded to Jia's tour at the Schindler House on that first site visit, and was really interested in, because there was one of the sleeping porches was getting remodeled or retrofitted, and thinking Dorian is one that thinks a lot about labor and invisible labor. So the Schindler House and Archive collaborated to give Dorian some of the names of the original laborers that helped to construct the house, and then the consequent restorations on the space. Because there's this mythology that, Schindler built it himself with the help of some other man. But thinking about bringing up these voices into the forefront, Dorian sang their name in this homage and said this beautiful prayer into all of the walls and traced the interior of the Schindler House in this sheath dress caftan, recording their voice, which they later ended up where they started. It was about a 45-minute itinerant piece. And then the piece went on for 45 more minutes, where Dorian did a performative interpretation of the honoring, took off her caftan, placed it over the speaker, replayed it, and so it was an audio piece that lived on, and then exited the room through the house, making visible her body in space. Yeah, so a lot of the works, most of them come together in bringing about visibility on the groundwork that VALIE Export had done already. Yeah, and those are the works.
Do either of you want to talk about this, and maybe we could share the video clip as well in the chat?
Sure. The video that's going to be played is one that was taken on an iPhone at the event, but it shows the way that I curated the event. There were 15-minute slots in between the pieces, and there were 3 durational works. So there would be times when there were overlap with the durational works, but then there would be also moments for the audience to socialize, to visit the exhibition, and to visit the durational works. I always feel like it's a nice moment to bring in some spaced up time in between performance works like this. So the video will show, I think there's three works, 2 of the durational works and Dorian's, within the context of the Schindler House and people moving around. And yeah, do you want to say something about this video too?
No, I think I was going to respond. No, play the video. And I think that's a really great example of the ways in which the performances were. If you play it now, I can sort of speak to it. The performances took over the entire campus of the site, and they were happening in simultaneity. So each of the performances, several were durational and a few had a concrete beginning and end. And so as you move through the house, you're seeing these kinds of event hoods distributed throughout this architecture, which I really loved as a proposition for thinking about this house as a container for multitudes over this period. And I think the video is a great way also to better understand the spatial and architectural conditions of the exhibition. This is Dorian singing. Beautiful, it's so beautiful, yeah.
I think it also shows the convivial nature of the event.
And it's, you know, just to hark back to some of the conversations about public and private spaces, I think what's been really nice and really evident in working at the MAK Center is that while we are stewarding a house, we are also a public institution, and the publics we invite in, they really, we call them domestic publics because it's still an idea of this exchange between a civic body of a kind of group making exercise, but not the idea of a public as this kind of giant congregation of people in public spaces, but it's really scaled and really intimate in the ways that people are invited into the house and then connect with one another through the programming.
Okay, so is that it for our images? Did we want to share one more, one of the video works? Do we have a link to, you want to share the one for people to see? Because I think we've talked a lot about her, you know, her photographic works and performance, but then this video work as well, which is kind of a key part of her body of work. Would you like to talk just briefly about that as well? And then I think we have something, we can point you towards something that you can watch, and we can maybe play a part of it too.
Play this a bit and then.
Okay.
So there was two films that, let's say, bookmarked the exhibition. The first one is Syntagma, which is a really wonderful video compilation in which she's constantly reframing the body in a variety of cinematic techniques, often borrowing from scenography. VALIE Export is known for her work in expanded cinema, where she's constantly thinking about and let's say pushing the boundaries of what would constitute cinematic work by rethinking the elemental pieces. So this would be the first thing you see in the exhibition when you walk into the house, which is a video piece of scenes of very clearly female identifying. Well, you know, these days it's, I don't know, but back then red nails would suggest a woman's hands, and pushing against the margins of a film strip. In many of the images you see in this film, there's a really amazing way she thinks about media and let's say the materiality of media, and often superimposing real bodies in front of images of bodies, or doubling the body over and over again so that you're looking at once at a representation of a woman and the woman, and yet you're also aware you're looking at the video of a woman. So there's these multimodal ways in which the woman's body is appearing through the screen to you as a viewer. That's kind of amazing in the that she was doing this in the 1960s, at the cusp of media theory it just says so much about how advanced she was thinking about image making, representational spaces, modes of production, all of it. The exhibitions, we're not going to see this film, but the exhibition is bookmarked at the end with a different kind of film, which is adjunct dislocation. I try to say the German title. And it's a little bit like this one, but in adjunct dislocation, it's a 3 projection piece, originally using 3 projectors, and then we showed it in a documentary fashion where it was actually a recording of the original media setup. But here she had on the left an image of a woman's body moving through a city with a camera attached, and on the right you would have 2 screens or projections which would show the camera in the front and the camera in the back. So you're both hyper aware that you are gazing upon the woman's body, that the woman's body is the object being viewed, and also reminded or somehow provoked to understand that the woman's body is also the subject that's viewing the city. So you're, again, this wonderful simultaneity of witnessing a body's experience as it moves through space, and you're able to witness both the body itself moving through space and then what the perspective of that body would have been in a moment before GoPros and a moment before police cams, like really a kind of rich territory. And I should just clarify, I am not a VALIE expert, so I do invite people to offer their expertise. I'm enamored with her, of course, but I just really need to kind of put that forward. I get nervous talking about artists that I haven't done a dissertation on.
Understandable. It's fine. And that is really where this, watching that is kind of a great way to talk kind of in a larger context about the work, because it is true. It's like looking like it's like a surveillance video, but also like doing like a selfie video as you're walking through the streets doing your TikTok, right? So it was really like a reasserting the woman's body in space, and these ideas of safety and these ideas of being in these public spaces. And that is kind of the one thread I feel like that we've kind of been touching upon this whole conversation today, which is like using the patriarchal or the traditional forms of architecture, whether it's in the city, draping your body in front of these statues, using the canvas of the MAK Center, the Schindler House, and kind of subverting it in a way that is drawing your eye to certain elements, but also to make you kind of reconsider the way that those were made. Dorian Wood's piece is so beautiful because this invisible labor that we had all talked about, that men didn't build these places alone, and the women were and other people and invisible workers were very key to them. Can you talk a little bit about just how you see that so relevant in today's conversations, like why this work speaks to you in this moment, and why it was really important for it to be exhibited and explored? Start with maybe Jia.
Yeah, I think there's, I think, thankfully, VALIE Export is coming into a moment of incredible recognition. She's had some major retrospectives throughout Europe, and I think is having a major exhibition in New York. I'm forgetting where. And I think there is a kind of keen interest right now to excavate the histories of feminism and feminist art in this moment, where there's kind of incredible questions around both feminist ethics of care, but also ideas around expansive definitions of gender, where it's worth revisiting. And then in the case of VALIE Export, in the specificity of this body of work is, as we are, there's also in the contemporary moment a deep interest in kind of media histories, and I think really interesting to think about her work as an important part of media history, which is maybe less forwarded than some of her feminist approaches. And then, of course, inevitably in Los Angeles, we're always thinking about the hostility of the urban environment, and not only how female bodies are moving through that, but how bodies of all forms of inequity have to navigate the vast civic disarray of it. I'm from Los Angeles. I love the city, but I fully recognize it can be experienced as a hostile space. And then there's just this hilarious, she's just funny. I mean, it's just a funny body of work. I don't know if she intended it, intended for it to be super humorous, but these ideas of like a woman's body randomly ornamenting a building is such a great commentary on classical or neoclassical architecture, where the woman's body does become ornament often. And, just so uncomfortable.
One of my, when I was researching her work, one of my favorite moments in an interview that she gave was she was talking about being on a panel with a bunch of other men from that were considered part of the expanded cinema movement. And throughout the duration of the conversation, nobody asked her about her work, but they did ask about her work, but they directed the question to the other men on the panel to actually discuss VALIE's work, even though she was right there. And in an example to illustrate how deeply the inequity was at that time that she was making this body of work. And I think about that and autonomy and as Jia mentioned, the expansive definition of gender that she laid the ground for, and how important that is when thinking about today, all of the reproductive rights that are being challenged with women's bodies, the trans rights, how important visibility is with filmmakers like Zachary Drucker, who tell these stories for us that are not in the mainstream. With Dorian, who's bringing these voices of the unsung laborers. We have just the bridge in Boston with the construction workers. I just feel like a lot of it is really important and can be relayed back to the contemporary landscape.
It's infrastructure, right? In that sense too, and this is what was calling to me so much in these images was these are like the bollards and the nice neat curbs and the almost making ramps on the staircases out in the city, like exactly what Gia was talking about, this using her body to annotate this very hostile environment that was built for able-bodied men who mostly were in charge of making the city run. And what I saw was exactly that, was a way of women's body kind of as a caring infrastructure, which we know is kind of what does hold cities together. Would you also like to speak to, I mean, I know you both said something so important, which I think is, people maybe not, it being part of the syllabus. I think it's such an interesting way to talk about an artist, to bring the artist out of the syllabus. This work was exhibited at the Venice Biennale in 1980. It had a big viewing in New York in like 2000, maybe, I believe. This is the first time it's been back in the US. Is that correct? Am I saying that these works?
I think in Los Angeles, I don't know its kind of provenance of exhibition throughout the United States.
But okay,
but in
so
Los Angeles, she hasn't had a solo exhibition since 2001.
Correct, right. So to that point, I mean, what is the like you're saying, how do we bring her out of the syllabus and kind of into these conversations? And she's still alive too. I mean, how do we give women artists their due while they are still alive, and make sure that we are bringing them into these conversations and bringing them into these the contemporary appreciation?
Oh my God, if
Well, and
VALIE had like
also,
a
yeah,
like representation like the box, I know how we
Yeah.
have in Los Angeles is constantly thriving, bringing those conversations and those artists into the forefront, and reestablishing them. I think a lot of it has to happen on that level, you know, where their representation is. Sorry, Gia.
yeah. And I was thinking, you know, a huge part of the intentions of the exhibition is to really, and just let's say architecture itself is the necessity of being co-present with people and works, and to view them with a kind of quality of liveness. Because I think what most people don't understand about these particular images and artworks is that they are not only images, but the way that, you know, the way VALIE produced this is that she wrapped the image around the panel. So if you look closely at the works, the edges have image also. And so when you start to see artworks in person in this way, it starts to also deepen an understanding of both the artist's intentions with the artwork, but also just some of the ways that these works in the age of the internet have become consumed primarily as images, when in fact they're also material and sculptural. And, you know, there's a flatness in some ways that gets, you know, it's like Walter Benjamin's written about this, but a flatness that gets produced when you only understand these works through the screen. And so to kind of see them. And I mean, we worked with a great exhibition. It was like very challenging because you can't touch the artwork and you can't touch the architecture. So it was this crazy situation where, like, okay, so the work has to float. We worked with an excellent designer, Bob Thornberger, who devised these and with the resources we had, designed these really clever infrastructures to support the artwork on these ledges, yet not fully needing to assemble the artwork to the house.
I think that some of the way, Gia, too, that you bring a little bit more dimension to VALIE's work is through the programming that you've devised around the exhibition. I feel like it's been very thoughtful and clever too. I don't know if you want to, I know you have a video series coming up.
Yeah. So again, I think it is a lot of the ways we try to activate exhibitions and think about the work we do is a lot through programming and artist led initiatives. We have a great screening coming up of VALIE's film Inadvertent Adversaries, which is one of the feature films she produced. This is organized by our exhibitions and programs manager, Seymour Politan, who's been really wonderful to have on the team. And it will be happening on Friday, today, and tomorrow night at Now Instant, which is a image hall in Chinatown. And I think thinking about the program as a kind of extension of the exhibition is an important part of producing, curating in the house, and then extending that through partnerships with small arts organizations like Home LA, like Now Instant, who are all of these kind of very LA specific or arts organizers and workers. I think that's been important for us.
And we should note that if you have questions, you can put them into the chat and we'll switch to questions in a few minutes. Oh, this image is coming up. We didn't really talk about specifically about Genital Panic and about Tapcha Cinema. If you want to just talk about, I think these were, again, really what you were trying to evoke also within this public-private realm of the Schindler House as well.
Yeah, so Genital Panic was both a performance and a set of 6 posters that VALIE Export produced. And it shows her sitting on a bench with crotchless pants. During the original performance, she had roamed this art house in Munich, exposing her crotch at close proximity to the audience. And what you're looking at is a kind of documentation of this. And then Tap Touch Cinema, which is a work she produced in 1968, was also a performance in which she presents herself in public streets. I wonder if we can go back to that, Eleanor. And she encloses her body in a cardboard box and invites the audience to experience this new form of cinema called touch cinema. So again, this is in 1968. It's the kind of height of television culture, and television's beginning has already entered into the living room. And so it's a proposition of a new kind of media experience called touch cinema. But what they're touching are her breasts. And inside the curtain box is her upper torso fully exposed. And she's both making commentary on like film and image culture, as well as the objectification of women. And she talks, and there's not prolific documentation. There's a short video of this, but you can see that like at first the men around her are like, ugh. And then they actually, they do get close and they start touching her, and they can't make eye contact when they do that. So there's also a kind of interesting observation of how her actions and happenings that are being placed in public spaces are provoking these responses. She's one of the few women actionists in the scene in Austria at the time. And often this is a group of artists who are working openly to provoke and push against societal boundaries through art making practices. Some of them have been arrested for that work. She hasn't, but often really pushing those boundaries. And I think what's really nice here is that, of course, it's very clearly about the female body confronting the male gaze, and she does it so viscerally, and so kind of, yeah, while still somehow making commentary on media culture. It's like amazing.
And this image in particular, it's just such a tender moment and happening, in public, like with all these people around it. And I think that's something about her work too, is you feel this level of intimacy with her or with her work, as people are, running errands, going about their day, like moving through these very busy public squares. And, I love the actionists. I did not know much about what was going on at the time, in Vienna and all these conversations. It's really worth, if you haven't read up about it. She wrote this wonderful kind of, I can drop the text in, kind of a response to actionists, kind of action that was happening, but she was countering it with like a feminist version of it. And like you were talking about, Chloe, with the Situationists and the flaneur, she was a flaneuse in that way, and it was still very much dominated by men, even though it was this idea of exploring the city and all these different ways of kind of challenging urbanism as in the post-war cities of Europe. So really worth going to dive in and learn more about this, especially if you're someone who likes exploring cities and looking at how the woman's role in moving through the city has changed, and these ideas of feeling safe and feeling surveilled and feeling objectified. So very, very interesting texts. Are there any questions, or are there anything else that Chloe and Jia wanted to add before we move into questions that maybe come up as we've been talking, or any last things you wanted to point people towards? Nope. I'm going to drop this link in. Does anyone have any questions? You can either put them in the chat, or I think you could even raise your hand and we could call on you. It's interesting to be able to see faces instead of just being in like a webinar dark hole. So I really love seeing everybody's names and faces. I see a hand raised. I'm going to let Eleanor take charge of this.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Alissa. And thanks so much, Chloe and Jia, for this really amazing conversation. I see we've got a question from Veronique. So Veronique, I'll allow you to unmute.
Thanks. And thanks so much for the discussion. I sadly have to hop off right at 2 for another Zoom, but I'm glad I got a chance to ask this question because, Chloe, I was really interested in the complications you were describing around Laura's piece and like how the audience was reacting. And I was already thinking about you know, the touch cinema piece. And like, I remember being in an art history class and like seeing the photo of that piece and wondering like, how did she get people to actually interact? Because you can tell that there's a discomfort. And, you know, it's like out on the street, I feel you have a different level of criticality, obviously, than you have in an art space, where I think people are aware of like how they are maybe going to be implicated in artwork. And I guess I was curious if there was any discussion about using any of the tactics that VALIE Export used in order, like, implementing any of those tactics as opposed to just like purely relying on the kind of didactic text to describe it to the audience.
Yeah, hi Veronique. Yes, for sure. We discussed a lot. Laura really wanted her gaze to be neutral. And so she wanted to have a bit of a diverted gaze, not to be objectified, but just to remove her relationship with the individual who was potentially going to interact with her work. So there was a lot about like the gaze, the body positioning, having her positioned on her back with her legs up also helped her to divert her gaze. We talked about like ways in like we can manipulate social media to help get the message across too, to help on other layers that existed outside of the exhibition space and preliminary to the event, and where to position the text, you know. And so we had some in the program, and then it really just boiled down to like number one, this, number two, you know, it was really basic. And it was very successful compared to what it was before, which was a little bit more conversational. The language was a little bit more conversational. But yeah, we definitely spent some time exploring many different options.
And I think there was a lot of thinking around not just Laura's work, but broadly how one extends an invitation to audience. We had discussed whether you would have suggested audience viewing on the map, or you would have language. I mean, even the form in which you would produce that invitation, whether it was an inscription or through writing or through sound or through kind of, by sound, I mean a bell or audio, or was a really interesting thought exercise with Chloe about how much you want to set up conditions of engagement and how open-ended you are comfortable being with people, let's say, getting it or not getting it, which I think is important also for our artwork and art experiences and performances, where there should be some level of uncertainty in performance and kind of open interpretation that happens, so that's not all over determined. And I think that was a nice balance in the ways that Chloe was thinking and working through that. And then the house itself is just a confusing sometimes place to know, you know, because, you know, it's not like a traditional museum or institutional space where there's just very clear ways in which when you enter you're conditioned. We have to often tell people that we treat the architecture as a work of art as much as the artworks, and to maybe please not like lean on the 100-year-old glass wall, which is also not great because we want to be an inviting space. So thinking about like how we care for a space in an open way, and how to develop, we try to do this workshop called Convivial Rules, where we worked with artists, Chloe was part of this, to rewrite the guidelines of use of the Schindler House. It's an unfinished project, but I think all of that is tied into the specificities of the house, and then some of the ways Chloe was working raised lots of great ideas and questions around how to produce that sociability while also ensuring there's care.
Yeah, and Jia, also you have just done such an amazing job in really bringing that the public-private boundary, I guess, like blurring the public-private boundary and doing all these events with food and all the, just so many tactile without touching the actual
Yeah.
home and architecture, but really allowing people to kind of feel that very visceral connection to the house and to the architecture through all these different sensory ways. So, and even being able to see the videos of these performances, that just your iPhone video that you took as you wandered through. I mean, that's how you experience it, right? And the exhibition images, sometimes they don't convey that, and
They don't do it.
That little, like you're wandering through this maze. You've done a great job with that. So it's you can tell.
Thank you so much, Veronique, for that question. Our next question is going to be from Chloe from the Rail team.
Hey everybody. Wow. I have loved watching this so much. Thank you three so much for this generous dialogue and presentation of the exhibition. I'm really keen to hear more. Jia, I really loved what you said about the domestic public, and I'm curious about what that unlocks relative to VALIE's work. When I think about the photographs in the house, I think about the history of the Schindler house and its own radical history of re-envisioning what domestic space looks like and is. And then this like public space, these photographs of these radically re-envisioned public spaces across the walls kind of, and the public entering into the space, both through the photographs as much as through performances and bodies moving through the space. And I'm curious what that term domestic public unlocks for the organization's work, as well as in this show, what it enlightened about the practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think the term came out of this anxiety watching our team work through programming interests, and often, as in any institution, the measure of success for a program is conventionally the number of people who are there. And that inevitably becomes a failed point of measurement for the Schindler house, because it is, one, extremely uncomfortable if there's a lot of people in that house, but also an unfortunate result of like an event economy that museums wrap themselves around, which is that we're constantly producing events and opportunities for consumption that maybe is more focused on this constant output. It just feels intensely unnecessary in the sense of thinking, when you think through the distribution of resources, we often don't value the distribution of resources into the back end of the program design, right? We're always kind of like fronting the resources to make many events happen. And I think domestic publics was a way to think about how can you offer this house as a public space, but not an imagination of the public as a number of people. That publicness is not only bodies in space, but relationships and a kind of intensity of relationships. So something feels public when there's ownership and access and responsibility and accountability, and not just here, the doors are open, come do whatever you want. So trying to build programs that foster a relationship and to focus on what the proposition is in terms of what a person can do in that house has been important. I think Alissa was alluding to this. So we've been doing this great, Maeve Atkinson is our education engagement coordinator, and she's been working with this artist, Renee Petropoulos, to design an annual series of tarot readings in the house. So that, I think, is a great example of what we are trying to achieve in the house in terms of a domestic public. So a tarot reading is two people. It's the artist that's doing the tarot reading, and then it's one person. And it's not, we're not evaluating it on the metric of how many people can consume this event, but we're thinking about like how amazing that intensity of experiences and the one-to-one engagement with the artist is an incredible privilege that requires kind of this institutional support and thought and design that it needs to allow it to happen. And that's been one of my favorite programming series that we've done at the house. And I unfortunately, we haven't had a tarot reading yet. Our team has not had one yet. But it's an open invitation. People show up, they buy an admission to the house, they sign up for a tarot reading. We, of course, immediately book up within the first 5 minutes. And we just let people know, like, even if you don't get the tarot reading, at least you're in the house. And I think allowing people to use that house in unexpected ways, that's not always aligned with a traditional understanding of a museum space or a traditional understanding of what public means. And I think that's been an important part of like the ways we're trying to think through activations in the house.
Wow, thank you so much for that answer. That was beautiful and really lovely to learn more about. Thank you.
Thanks, Chloe. That was a great question. I would like to ask a question to you all, which I think will be the last question for today. I am really curious to know more about the collaboration, if there was any, between the performers for the performance events at the MAK Center. So I know we talked about how the performances happen simultaneously, but I'm wondering if the performers watched each other's work beforehand, or if they had any kind of collaboration time or like witnessing of each other's work in the space.
I would say that the artists definitely watched each other's work when they could. And there's one in particular that felt a bit collaborative. As Andrea was developing her piece and we were setting the schedule for the performance, it became evident that Dorian's audio recording would sift through the single pane windows and the very light structure of the Schindler house and materiality to invade or imbue the space that she was going to perform in. And we had a lot of discussion about that. I did with her. Dorian said, yes, you can turn it down. Or so we went back and forth and listening to the audio with the artists. And at the end of the day, Andrea performed in silence a portion to Dorian's work, because she said that the message that Dorian was giving was more important than anything that she had to say at that moment. And I thought that was a beautiful welcoming in. There was a vocalist that came in at towards the last 15 minutes of Andrea's piece, where we did lower down the volume, but it still continued to play, and it was still audible to everybody. But that was like a really nice ushering in of collaborative nature into the works. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And now to conclude, I believe we're going to have a reading from Alissa.
Yes, I will. I'm going to drop. Jia surfaced this quote, which I remember had reading this interview when I was doing the research for my piece in Untapped Journal, which I believe was linked earlier in the chat if you want to read it. Kind of looking at Export's work as this like tactical urbanism, this annotation of the urban environment. Sometimes the toxic patriarchy of the urban environment. And this, I think, really, it's just answers to her question. She's actually talking about a lot of her video work here, but I'll drop the interview because it's from 2012, but I think it has a lot. Again, like everything feels quite fresh and quite relevant for women and femmes right now, all of these topics. So just an answer to the interviewer, I'll read in two parts. In the 1960s, our attempts to cultivate a direct and uncontrolled language and art were based upon the idea that the dominant language was a form of manipulation. The plan was to circumvent these forms of social control and to develop other forms of language outside the system dominated by men. This was the strength of the female body, to be able to express directly and without mediation. Much of the art of the time, from body art to video and direct performance, was concerned with similar issues. And then there was media art, which made it possible to express things directly without having to rely on the written word, which, as you said, was manipulated by men. The female body has always been a construction. Even feminist art of the 1970s fashioned a body in accordance with its own ideas, and in this regard, it was a form of manipulation too. Subsequently, we've had to engage with a lot of things that we used to disavow as manipulation. Something to think about as you go into the weekend.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Alissa. Thank you so much, Jia and Chloe, too, for the amazing conversation today and for everything you did at the MAK Center. It's so incredible. And yeah, thank you so much to the team at MAK for all your work on the exhibition as well. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring the NSE and for supporting our archive, which you can view on the Rail's YouTube channel and where this conversation will be posted shortly. The Rail has been free and independent for 23 years, and a donation will directly support our writers, production staff, and operations. So please do consider supporting our work via a link that's in the chat. And join us on Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Pacific Time for a conversation with Anthony Huberman and Kay Larson on the occasion of John Giorno, Jasmine Byrne at Cory Monzuto in New York. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. And you can turn on your microphone for a chance to say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Center.
Thank you so much,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody. Thank you, Alissa.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you so much. Enjoy your weekends.
Bye. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.